Howdy, all you coding cowgirls and cowboys. This is Prof G, and I hope you're ready to giddy up, because we're about to learn about source control in Xcode with Git and GitHub. Now, this can be a bit tricky for newbies to understand because there are new terms, there are things happening on the local machine and in the cloud, and with multiple versions of your code, you want to pay attention to which version you are updating. Even more challenging, there are quirks in the version of Xcode that I'm using that might flummox the new user. But fear not, we'll take you through a tutorial that's perfect for beginners, clearly illustrating what's happening locally and in the cloud, so be prepared to learn how to create a GitHub repo for your Xcode project. We'll save or commit changes in your code. We'll create a development branch to test your work before incorporating changes into your primary work area, and we'll show you how you can recover an Xcode project from GitHub if you need to. Get your code lasso ready and prepare for some Swifty code wrangling. Giddy up! Now, I'm assuming if you're here, you already created a GitHub account and configured Xcode with GitHub. If you haven't, the steps on how to do this are in the very first video of the course. You'll see that as the first video in the playlist at bit.ly/prof-g-SwiftUI, all lowercase. So if you need to, go there now, get GitHub set up in Xcode, then come back. Now, before we begin, here are a few terms that we'll use. So source control will allow us to save copies of our software development projects. You'll want to do that for several reasons. You'll want to save versions over time to keep track of what new features were added and what bugs were fixed. You might want to revert back to an earlier version, say if a change created a bug, or if you decided you didn't want to include a feature that you were experimenting with. You'll use source control to share your code with others, and source control is vital when you're working on projects as the member of a team. Now, you probably also noticed from our earlier lessons that we weren't saving anything, and that's because Xcode saves changes automatically. There is a save option under the file menu, but we really don't use that. But source control is different from this ongoing project saving that happens in Xcode. What we do with source control is we create discrete copies or snapshots of our entire project and all of its files at a given point in time, say after we finish a lesson or after we added a feature. So instead of the ongoing saving, we're going to specifically say, okay, now is time to save a version in source control. Now, we'll be using two products that Xcode connects to handle source control. Those are Git and GitHub. Git is open source version control software that you've already got on your Mac. And when we use Git to save versions of our project, those projects are saved locally to your Mac's hard drive. Now, GitHub is a web-based service. It's actually owned by Microsoft now, and that allows us to take versions we're saving locally and push them into the cloud. This gives us a backup of our project in the clouds, and it allows others to access our projects if we want to share it with them. Now, our primary holding place for a project is referred to as a repo or repository, and each version of a project that you save is called a commit. So you can have several commits inside of a repo. You might consider a repo as being kind of like a folder that holds all versions of all the files in your projects, while the commits are individual versions that you've saved in the repo. And as you work through the lessons, you probably want to commit after each lesson, and certainly when you're done with an app. Now, some more terms. When we push, we're saving changes that we've committed locally into the cloud. In our case, we're pushing them up to GitHub. And a push syncs up any local commits on our computer with what we've got in our GitHub repository. Now, a branch refers to a set of commits that splits from the earlier commit. You might create a branch, for example, to test out new features or fix bugs without impacting the release version of your source code. Now, when you're ready to incorporate changes from a branch, you'll perform what's called a merge, which means combining the changes you made on the branch with your original code. We're going to see all these terms in action during our tutorial, so hopefully that'll help you understand them better. And there are quite a few other terms involved in Git and GitHub: fetch, pull request, but we're going to stick with these ones for now. And one more note to my students. So these instructions are for saving your work to your own Git and GitHub repositories, and you want to use these techniques. But you'll also be submitting your weekly work via GitHub Classroom, and the teaching assistants will provide more information about that. So let's create a brand new SwiftUI project for use in this tutorial, and then you can go back and use these techniques on your own projects later. So I'm going to launch Xcode, create a new Xcode project. This is going to be an iOS app, and I'm going to name this GitHub Space Exercise. Now, I'm going to deliberately add a space between the word GitHub and exercise. I don't normally recommend adding a space into project names, but we're going to deliberately do that here so that we can illustrate one of the reasons why you wouldn't want to do that, and that has to do with GitHub URLs. So we're going to create a SwiftUI project. When you press Next, make sure that you've clicked on Create Git Repository on my Mac. So that's got to be checked. Then click Create. I'm going to adjust my Xcode, and now let's modify our base project. So we start out with the globe image and the text "Hello World" that Xcode gives us. And now when we clicked Save Git Repository on my Mac, Xcode created an initial commit or version save of the stuff that we get when Xcode first starts. Now we're about to make a change, and I want you to notice what's going to happen to the left of the line numbers when we make that change. And by the way, if you're not seeing the line numbers, just open Preferences under the Xcode menu, select the Text Editing tab, and click Show Line Numbers. So I'm going to highlight the text Hello World, and I'm going to replace it with V 1.0. And do you see the blue marker that shows up to the left of the line numbers? That's a change indicator, and that means a change was made on this line since the last time a project was committed. Now remember, Xcode created a Git repository for us on the Mac. That counts as the first commit, so the blue means this is a change made since then. Now if I click the change indicator, I get a pop-up menu with options Show Change or Discard Change. Select Show Change, and we see the old line that we replaced. It's in gray and has no line number, and it's above the blue highlighted change that we just made. Now there's another way that we can compare change too. If you click this icon in the upper right hand corner, it has a left pointing and right pointing arrow. That's the Enable Code Review icon. And we see we get two windows, the change on the left and the old code on the right, with highlights showing where we can compare the change. Potentially useful, and if you decide, yeah, I don't want the change, you can click on the change indicator again, select Discard Change, and we revert back to what was there the last time a commit was made, or for us, that was the state of the project when we started. The blue change indicator goes away, and I'm going to click off the code review in the upper right-hand corner. Now I've highlighted Hello World again, and another thing to pay attention to is what's going to happen to the right of the Content View file name. That's the name of the file we're currently working in. So see it on the Project Navigator? I'm going to replace Hello World with version 1.0, and ho! There's a little M next to our Content View file name. That means that there is a code change or M modification in this file. Or another way to put it, there are uncommitted changes in this file. And the change specifically is this line indicated by this blue guy here. Now let's add some more changes. Underneath the text, I'm going to say .font to add a font modifier, and I'll pass in .large title as my font, lower camel case. I'll add a font weight modifier with .font weight, and I'll pass in .black, which is going to give me the boldest font option I can get. And under my image, I'm going to highlight and cut out the foreground color modifier, and I'm going to paste that after the closing curly in our V stack underneath padding, and this will allow me to apply a color change to everything in the V stack. And in this tutorial, we'll make 3 version modifications, version 1, version 2, version 3, and those will be in the color red, green, and blue. So let's change the foreground color to .red. And why don't we also make the image bigger? So I'm going to delete the image scale modifier, and below that I'll say .resizable and .scaled to fit. And I'm going to replace the globe with an image named 1.circle. Cool, look at that. We've got version 1.0 of our app, and it's all in red. And we see there are blue change indicators on the left of the line numbers that indicate all the lines that have changes since our last commit. Now let's take a look at version control in Xcode. And if you look in the navigator pane, find the second icon from the left. It's a square with a sort of X in the middle. The tooltip here says Show Source Control Navigator. So click that, and ooh, the navigator looks different. Now there are 2 buttons here. The Changes button is highlighted. We actually don't use that very much, but it shows you a list of local changes. Files with changes will be listed here, and if you click one, you'll see the code review display showing a comparison of after and before changes, just in case you want to review them. You usually don't. But let's click on the repositories button. That's where the real action is. And we can click on the triangle to expand the GitHub exercises main. And the 2 areas we want to focus in on are branches, expand that, we just see main, and remotes, expand that, and we see nothing. But that'll change. Now, if I click on the first line, the one that says GitHub exercises main, I see a list of all the commits. There's only one. This is the initial commit. And before I perform any additional commits, let's create a GitHub repository or repo so that we can push our local commits to GitHub so they'll also be stored in the cloud. And to do that, just right-click on GitHub Exercises main, then select New GitHub Exercises Remote. GitHub Exercises is the name of our project. This brings up a window with the configuration info that you used when setting up Xcode with GitHub. The repo name is just the project's name by default. You could change that. We won't. We can make the repo public or private. Remember, if you make it private, then employers won't see your work. And I've had lots of former students hired based on work they had publicly available in their GitHub profile. By the way, you should also have a link to your GitHub account in your LinkedIn profile. And I advise you not to be afraid of showing the beginning work that you do as a student. If you have lots of projects up there, it shows a commitment to learning. Employers can see that your skills are progressing over time. Definitely something they want to see. And later on, when you get more substantive projects, you can highlight them in your GitHub profile so that those show up first. So really, I don't recommend setting a repo to private unless there's something proprietary that you really feel you need to hide, although it is possible to switch back and forth between public and private if you need to. And you can also enter a description in here if you'd like, then click on Create, and you see a brief indication in the lower left-hand corner. It says the repository is being created on GitHub. Then you'll see a message that says pushing, which means the initial commit on your Mac is being pushed up to GitHub in the cloud, and then we're done. Let's see what we've done. Right-click on GitHub Exercises, select View on GitHub, your browser will open up, and you're at the repo you just created. Very cool. Now in the browser, we see an entry for GitHub Exercises Xcode.proj, and we also see a folder called GitHub Exercise. Now if you head to the Finder and you take a look in your project folder, these are the same as the two entries in your project folder. So your whole Xcode project is now on GitHub. And if we look at the GitHub Exercises folder in the Finder, then click on the same folder in the browser, we see the same file names. Let's take a look at contentview.swift in the browser, and we see the results of that first commit, which was the state of our app when it first started before we made any of our changes. See how we just have the globe image and the hello world in here? So we're looking at this saved to the cloud. This file is on GitHub. Now let's head back to Xcode and take a look at the same thing saved on our Mac in Git. So if we head back to Xcode, double click on that first commit, we see all of these project files that were saved as part of the first commit, and there's quite a few in here. We haven't touched most of these, but there are a lot of files that support your Xcode project. All that stuff is committed. But you can find contentview.swift, click that. We see a code review here, but there were no changes since this is the first commit. That's why we don't see any changes between the left and the right-hand side. So we just put the first part of the project up there with no changes in it. I'll click back on GitHub Exercises, and now I just see one initial commit. But if we go back and click on the folder in the Navigator's pane to pull up the Project Navigator, we still see an M next to Content View. And we also see those blue change indicator lines next to the lines that have changes in them. We haven't committed any of our changes yet, so let's do that now. We'll head back to the Source Code Navigator, click GitHub Exercises main at the top. We see we've just got the one commit in here. Then head up to the Source Control menu, select Commit. This pulls up a dialog box, and on the left-hand side, we see the project files. There should be a checkbox next to the files that have changes in them. For us, that's only one, contentview.swift. If you click any of the files, you'll see the code review side by side. If you wanted to, you could click in between the code review panes, and you could select either don't commit or discard change. You usually don't want to do that here. Most of the time, we're ready to commit, and we don't want to perform an extra code review. Then down in the lower left-hand corner, there's a checkbox that says push to remote. So when you click that, not only are we going to commit the changes to Git on our Mac, but we're also going to push a version of that commit so it's also stored in GitHub on the cloud. And also, I'm not going to be able to commit until I write a comment in the blank space here. Now, there's no clear indicator that this is needed except that your commit button won't highlight unless you've entered a comment. So remember, if your button isn't highlighting, you might need to add a comment. I'm just going to enter my comment as version 1.0-red, and also know that if you don't have any checkboxes checked next to the files, you won't be able to commit and push. The button won't be highlighted. We just have one file with modifications in it, and it's checked, so we're good. So we can head down to the lower right and click this button that says commit file and push. And boom, we see a new commit above the initial commit, and the comment that we entered is also shown in here, so we know what this commit is about. Nice. Now also look under remotes inside Origin, and we see something called main. Now we're saving these commits to what's called the main branch, although right now we only have one branch. Main is usually where you keep the release versions of your work. Why don't we right-click on GitHub Exercises again and view on GitHub. Our browser opens. It looks like it's opening a second tab in here, so I'll close this first one. And notice next to the GitHub Exercise folder, our comment is listed. You can also see it was updated 11 seconds ago. So click the link to the GitHub Exercise folder, and inside we see initial commit next to all but one of these files. That's because these other files weren't modified in our last commit. The only one that was changed is the contentview.swift. It has the comment for the latest commit in here, which is version 1.0-red. And if we click on contentview.swift, we can see this code has all of our updates in here. It has the new image, the font changes, red is the foreground color. Perfect. Now I'm going to press the back button in my browser. We see our repo name up here, GitHub Exercises. And by the way, if you click on your username, this brings you to your account page on GitHub. I've got some of my more popular repos listed here. You can highlight projects later on if you want to. You probably have nothing in here if this is the first time you've used GitHub, but you can click on the Repositories tab. You'll see your repos in here, the latest one on top. Again, you probably only have one in here, but if you click the repo name, you'll be back seeing the files that are associated with this repo. Also note how GitHub created the repo name. We had a space between GitHub and exercises when we created our Xcode project, but GitHub adds a dash. How come? Well, if you click up in the address bar in the browser, you can see the URL that it created for this repo. It's just github.com/your user ID / the project name. Well, you can't add spaces in a URL, so GitHub adds dashes by default if it finds a space. One reason why you want to avoid spaces in your project name, not a big deal, but in our case, our project on GitHub is named slightly differently than the project name in Xcode. Now back in Xcode, we can see over on the right, we've got our 2 commits, looking good. Then let's click on the project navigator, remember that little folder in the upper left, and we can click on contentview.swift. Notice next to contentview.swift, we don't have an M there anymore. That's gone away. We also don't see any blue change indicators next to the code that was changed, and that's because there are no changes since the last commit. The last commit is the commit we just made. Very nice. So let's simulate another new update. We're going to change text to version 2.0. We're going to change the image to 2.circle, and let's change the foreground color to green. Now notice we made modifications since our last commit. We see blue change indicators next to the change lines, and we see an M next to the content view. So let's head to the source control navigator, and under the source control menu, select commit. We have one modified file with a check next to it. Let's click on push to remote. We'll enter our comment as version 2.0-green, then click on the button that says commit one file and push, and now we have a new commit for version 2.0 on Git on our computer, and the new commit is also pushed to GitHub in the cloud. Head back to the project navigator, and we don't see any indicators that there are uncommitted changes. The M is gone from content view, and all the blue change indicators are gone. Nice! Now in the next scenario, we're going to imagine that we're going to start work on an experimental feature. We'll add a rectangle to the screen to represent this new experimental feature, but when we do this, we don't want to disturb the code that we have right now. We're going to assume that that's shipping code. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a separate branch. We're going to call that development. That's going to be a new set of project files that we can modify. We'll modify our development branch with a new feature, and we can also keep modifying the main branch, updating that with new shipping code. And then, once we're satisfied with our new feature, we'll merge the new branch, the development branch, in with the main branch, and this will add the new features that we've worked on in the development branch into the main branch. To quote 90s R&B star Montel Jordan, this is how we do it. So click on the source control navigator under branches, right-click on main, currently our only branch, and let's select new branch from main. Now this box asks us to name the new branch. Let's call it development. Click create. Now notice under branches, we have a development branch on top of main, and the word current is next to development, indicating that we're currently working on the development branch that we just created, not the main branch. Let's take a look down in remotes. Remotes means what we've got in the cloud on GitHub. We have the original main, but nothing in development yet. We'll change that in a bit. So since we're working on the new development branch, let's add our feature, our rectangle. So we'll click on the project navigator, head to content view, and below the text view, we'll add capital R rectangle, followed by open and close parentheses, no space, and would you look at that? We have our new feature, the rectangle looks great. Also note we've got a blue change indicator on the line next to where we added the rectangle, and the content view now has an M next to it. These all indicate that we have uncommitted changes. So let's head back to our source control navigator, and under remotes, we only have main right now. This technically shows the main branch inside of Origin, but all the branches we create remotely will be inside of Origin. But head to the source control menu and select commit. And look at this. For some reason, content view, our only file that was modified, isn't checked. So let's check that now. And for my comment, I'm going to add a note that says, development, added rectangle. I'll click push to remote, and hey, look at the pull down menu to the right of this. It says origin/development and in parentheses create. This means that Xcode is going to create a new development branch in GitHub when it pushes the commit to GitHub. Cool. So let's click commit one file and push, and we now have two remotes under Origin, main, which represents the original branch, and development, which represents the new branch that has the rectangle. And we can verify this on GitHub. Let's head back to the browser. I'll refresh my page, and note it now says 2 branches before it said we had 1 branch. Let's click on this 2 branches link. We won't worry about the protecting main branch. That'll only complicate things for us right now. We'll be careful. But we see main and development as 2 branches in here. Let's click development, head into the GitHub exercise folder, and look at content view, and we see we've got a rectangle in there. But if we head back to the GitHub exercises, click on the 2 branches link, and this time click on the main branch. Let's look back in GitHub exercise and content view here. This is a different branch. The main branch does not have the rectangle. 2 branches, 2 separate projects. Cool. You can click on GitHub exercise in the browser so that we can see both branches in here, but let's head back to Xcode. Click on the project navigator. We see all of the indicators for uncommitted changes are gone. No M next to content view, no blue change indicators on our code, just as expected. Now let's imagine this. We want to keep working on our main branch, updating the existing project, but without the new cool rectangle feature that's in our development branch. We'll assume that hasn't been fully tested yet. So to resume our work on the main branch, we've got to switch to that branch. So we do that in the source control navigator by right-clicking on main under branches and select switch. This used to be called checking out, but in the updated version of Xcode, it now says switch. Checking out a branch is how it's usually referred to in Git and GitHub. I'm not sure why Apple changed it to switch. It wouldn't surprise me if they change it back to check out at some point. You should be asked if you want to switch to main, select switch. And right now we're seeing a bug in my version of Xcode. Hopefully it's not showing up in yours. The main branch should be listed as current. It's not showing up as the current branch in mine, even though it really is. So I really did switch to the main branch. That is current. It's just not showing it here. To see this change, all I need to do is click on the Project Navigator icon, then back on the Source Navigator icon. The screen refreshes, and now I see main is properly listed as the current branch, verifying that we did, in fact, switch to the main branch. So again, hopefully you didn't see that bug and have to go through it, but if you did, just do what I did. Now let's make changes to our shipping project. Click the Project Navigator and select Content View. Again, this is the main branch. It doesn't have the rectangle in it. That's on the development branch. Let's change the image to 3-dot circle. We'll change the text to version 3.0 and the color to blue. So now we have uncommitted changes, so we'll head back to the source control navigator. I slipped and clicked the project file. I didn't mean to do that. And so let's commit those changes to the main branch. Under the source control menu, we'll select commit. Content view is selected this time. Nice. We'll click push to remote. We'll write our comment as version 3.0 blue. But under the menu next to push to remote, it went back to main, which is the name of the remote branch associated with the branch we switched to. So this is where we want to push those changes. Thanks for noticing this, Xcode. You can click on content view if you want. It just shows the changes that we need to push. This is what we expect. Click on the button that says commit one file and push, and back in the project navigator, we don't see any uncommitted change indicators. We've got all this version 3 stuff up on the main branch. Now let's imagine we've decided, hey, the rectangle looks great, no bugs, let's add this to our current project, and the way that we do that is we're going to merge our development branch into our main branch. This is going to keep any subsequent changes we made in the main branch, so we're going to keep the version 3 and the blue stuff in main, but it'll also add any new changes from the development branch, so we're going to see the rectangle show up at the bottom. Let's see if that's what we get. So make sure you're in the source control navigator. Let's right-click on Development Branch and select Merge Development into Main. Xcode says, are you sure you want to merge from development? We are sure. Click on merge. Now that merge takes place on Git. It's committed to Git, but it hasn't been pushed up to GitHub yet. That's why we see this little arrow here with the number next to it. That means there are 2 files that need to be pushed to GitHub to sync it up with what we have on Git on our Mac. I'm not sure what the 2 files are. I know one is Content View, but to check out the results of the merge, let's head to the Project Navigator, click on Content View, refresh our preview screen, and oh, will you look at that. We've got our blue version 3. Those were the last changes on the main branch, but we also have the rectangle that we just merged in from development. Nice. Now let's head back to the source control navigator and resolve this issue with the arrows, which indicates that we need to push a commit to GitHub. If we head to the source control menu and select commit, we don't see any files in here. We've got nothing to commit. That's because the merge makes a local commit to Git on our Mac. So we've got nothing to commit locally to Git. That's already been done. So click cancel here, but we do need to push these changes to GitHub. And there's a menu option just for push. Look under the source control menu, and right under the commit option, there is a push option. Select that. This says, do you want to push the changes to main? Yes, we do. Click push. The arrow goes away. Now we're in sync with Git on our Mac and GitHub in the cloud. Nice work. You now know how to work with Git and GitHub branches and how to merge the 2 branches. Also, if you decide you no longer need that development branch and you want to delete it, you can just right-click on Development Branch under Remote's Origin, select Delete. Also click the option to delete branch and remote repository. There's once again a quirk in my version of Xcode. The branch isn't cleared from origin, but it did delete properly. If you quit and resume Xcode, it'll reset. You'll also want to right-click on Development Branch under Branches and delete that too. And if I did quit Xcode and resume, you can see the development branch is no longer under Remotes or under Branches. And if you refresh your repo in the browser, you'll see there's only one branch in GitHub. Cool. Now the last super useful thing we'll go through in this tutorial is how to recover an Xcode project from a repo on GitHub. So let's imagine that your hard drive crashes. You've lost your project on your Mac and you need to recover your project using GitHub on another Mac. Well, let's simulate this. I'm going to quit Xcode. I'm going to throw my GitHub exercises project into the trash. It's gone. Well, now to get the project back, we can open our browser and head to our account on GitHub. Click Repositories, find the repo you want to download. Again, you probably only have one in here, GitHub Exercises. Then look at this big green code button. Click this, and now you should be able to select Open with Xcode. But for some reason, my beta version of Xcode isn't loading. When I select this, Xcode hangs, so I've got to go up to the Apple menu, force quit Xcode, but no fear, there is an alternative. Instead, click the copy icon to the right of the URL. This copies the URL for the project onto the clipboard, then open Xcode, and this time, instead of creating a new project, select Clone an existing project. You should see a search bar at the top that says Search or Enter Repository URL. Paste in the URL you just copied, press return, click that clone button, then Xcode asks you where you want to save the project that it's about to download from GitHub. I'm going to select desktop, click create, and blam! The project is downloaded. Let's take a look at the content view just as we left it. We've got our version 3 and our rectangle. It's in blue. And if we want to verify that we're still linked to GitHub, let's modify this. We'll change the image to 4.circle, the version to 4.0, and the foreground color to purple. Then we can go up to the source code menu, commit. My commit comment will be version 4.0-purple. We'll click push to remote. I see there's another file that hasn't been checked in here. Not sure if I need to add that file, but I'm going to click it just in case. Then click commit to files and push. Looks like we have no problem. If I head to the source code navigator, click the repositories button, right click on my project and select view on GitHub, my repo loads in the browser. Let's look at the GitHub exercises folder, click on the contentview.swift file, and sure enough, we see the code for version 4.0 in purple. Nice! Swifter, you are now committed to Git and GitHub. You can create local and remote repos, commit and push, create and merge branches, and recover lost files. That's what most beginners will want to do with Xcode, Git, and GitHub, but keep this project because in a future lesson, I'll show you how we can roll back code to an earlier version if you need to. Again, as a reminder, it's probably a good idea to commit and push after each one of our lessons. And Swifter, keep hacking.